In this video, we're going to texture our easy chair. I'll begin by marking select the chair and deleting the history and freezing transform. And then we're going to go piece by piece and use automatic mapping. I'll start by selecting the seating area here, and I'll go up to UV and I'll choose automatic. I'll return to the object mode, and then I'm going to go to UV editor, and I'll right click inside and hit F on the keyboard. It'll show me how it has been broken down. So essentially we're going to do each of these separately, and we would first go to UV shell. The pattern is going to be consistent, so I'll select all these pieces and gather them together as one, just stacking them. And then I'll marquee all of them and just move them outside that center box. Returning to my viewport and returning to the object mode, I'll select the next piece and I'll do the same. And the thing to note here is that when you go to the UV editor, you'll notice that it falls in the very center of that box each time we create a UV map for a new piece. So to avoid the confusion, we pull them outside. So if I were to shift select that first one we did and that one, you can see there's the one we did before, here's the new one. So very often you'll have different textures for different elements that fall on a UV map, and this would be the way to approach them before you would gather them all together in the center, as we will, and generate the UV map for the texture that will go into Photoshop. So I'm going to do this to each of them, and then when we return, we'll put them all back in the center and scale them appropriately. I've gone in and generated the UV maps for each of the sections of the chair. Now, I've deleted one of the arms because it's easier to just texture one, then two, and then once the texture's on, I can duplicate it and flip it over. So the last thing I need to do is texture the legs. So I'll marquee select all of them, and now that they're all selected inside the viewport, they're going to be a solid brown, so I'll simply go to UV shell, marquee select all of them, and I'll pull them out like that, and I'll start to scale those down. They're kind of insignificant when it comes to rendering. So I'll return my object mode. Now I'll select all the components, and then I'm going to go into my UV map, and I'm going to place them all in that box that Photoshop would see, which is this section right here. So I'll just go ahead, right click, choosing UV shell, hitting W. I'm going to stack them all on top of each other, then select all of them, and then I'm going to scale them up a little bit just to maximize the usage of the UV shell. Now I'll marquee all of them, and I'll hit R on the keyboard and I'll just scale them up. And now I'll get the legs by marquee selecting all of them, hitting W. I'll put them there. I'm going to make sure that I return to my viewport and then I have selected these in the object mode. Otherwise I'll get an error message when I go to generate the UV map. Now that I have all of those in place inside the UV editor, I'll go to image, UV snapshot. I'll set it for PNG, and then the aspect ratio will be consistent. I'm going to leave it at 1024 by 1024, making sure that the edge color is black, and I'll put it inside my project. When I click on apply and close and it goes away, that means we generated that PNG and we're ready to put the texture on it. So next we'll jump into Photoshop and we'll do that. I've opened up the PNG we generated from Maya, and I'm now going to copy and paste the texture I'm going to use for it into the PNG file. Selecting the image, Command A or select all, Command C or edit copy. I'll jump to the destination, go to Edit Paste, or Command V. On a PC, it would be Control C, Control V. Now that I have the texture in, I'm going to put it below the UV map by changing the layer order. So I'll click on the icon inside the layer window, drag it below. Now I can see how it applies to the actual UV map. Now I'm going to scale it down a little so that the texture isn't quite as large against the chair when we put it on. So I'll hit Command T or Control T, and I'll go ahead and drag on one of the corners, holding the Alt or the Option, and scale that in just to maximize the pattern. Now I'm going to introduce a layer with just some brown to color the legs of the chair. Going down to the bottom of the layer window, I'll add a new layer. I'll name it legs. It's a good idea to name these layers. I'll hit M on the keyboard, get my marquee, make a box shape like that. Then I'll just go to my color picker on the toolbar and I'll introduce a brown. And I'm going to hold down the Option, hit delete. That would be Alt Delete on a PC, or you can use your paint bucket if you want, or your brush. I'll deselect and save. Now, before I introduce it into Maya, turn off the UV map because that shows up on the model itself unless we turn it off. So I'll go and I'll click that off. I'm going to name it UVs. It's really good to get into these habits to keep yourself organized. I'll hit Command S to save again, and now we'll go into Maya and we'll apply it. Back in Maya, the first thing I'm going to do is with everything selected, I'll right click and I'll choose Assign New Material. That'll be Arnold, AI Standard Surface. Going over to the channel box and the attribute editor, I'll select it and name it. And then under the Base tab, going to Color, out to the checkerboard. I'll click on it, I'll select File, and then over to the attributes once again. I'll click on the little folder and I'll navigate out to get my texture. And if you don't see it immediately, as in this instance, all I have to do is right click inside the viewport and I'll hit 6 on the keyboard and there's my texture. Now the last thing I need to do is select the arm. I'll hit Command D. Holding down V, I'll kind of snap it into position first. And then going to the channel box, I'll rotate it 180 degrees on the Y-axis. I'll go to an orthographic view and just make sure that that arm shows up exactly where it should be. I'll hit 4 so I can see the rest of the geometry a little bit more clearly. And we should have something like this.